Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Coffee HEMA with me, Jamie McGeever. I wanted to talk today about no knockout format for tournaments. What does that mean, right? So most tournaments are what I would consider to be a knockout format. The standard format remains the pool's elimination structure, where everybody enters the pool stage. You get a pool of 5, 6 is the normal kind of size. You fight everybody in your pool, and then a certain number of fighters pass the threshold, top 16, top 24, whatever, based on whatever scoring system you've got, go through to an elimination round. And the elimination round is once you've lost once, you're out, you're done for the tournament. So there's two stages of knockout there. First of all, you might not make the cut for the limbs that you knocked out, you stop fencing. And the second is, of course, if you lose in the elimination round, then you're not out of the tournament. And a no knockout format is kind of the opposite of that. That there were no situations, barring injury, barring kicking out for conduct or whatever, that result in you not continuing. Right, that you will always be fencing towards to the end. The most common, like in kind of other sports in particular, no knockout format is the Swiss system. The Swiss system, each round you are paired with somebody who's performed similarly to you across the whole tournament. So you get kind of close matchups in the Swiss system, sort of getting progressively closer normally. Everybody is getting a match, again, regardless of how good or bad your performance happens to be. There are many other ways of organising no knockout tournaments, and there are issues with Swiss and there's issues with others, but I want to focus on one aspect in particular. And all of this boils down to my view that when you're thinking about your tournament design, it's important to think not just about the winners who are going to go on and get a medal, not, the winners, the top fencers, but also about the other 30, 40, 50, whatever people in your tournament. And making sure they all get a good experience is kind of critical, right? What is a good experience? That varies person to person, and people have different opinions. But one thing I would say that is quite important for a good experience, even if it's not sufficient necessarily, is that the fencers have as many fights as they want to have. That could be not too many, but it normally means normally people have not enough fights, I would say. And when you have the standard pools elimination structure, let's say we've got pools of 5 and top 16 through, some fencers are getting 4 fights, right? And the fencer who goes to the end, right, they've got their fight at 16, they've got their fight at 8, they've got their fight at the top 4, so the semi-final, and then they've got a final, right? So you've got anywhere between 4 and 8 matches, depending on how well you do in the tournament. So some fencers are getting literally double the number of fights that other fencers are getting. And moving to no knockout formats, you have to, to manage the time, you have to kind of reduce what the top end of that is, but having a more even spread across the number of fights that everybody gets means that, yeah, okay, fine, some people get fewer, but actually most people are going to get more. You're probably going to you wouldn't end up being everyone gets 8 unless you massively increase the time, but you'd probably be able to quite easily manage it so everybody, for instance, gets 6 in the same time that you would run a kind of classic pools elimination structure. I've run a few. They've universally been well received. There's some sword shenanigans rules that I'm going to talk about in a later video with one example of this. And also actually the format I use for beginners at Wessex that I designed was explicitly intended to be this no knockout format. The beginners at Wessex neither really used a true Swiss system, but the way I do both. The principle behind them is that fights start kind of very broad in terms of skill range, and as the tournament progresses, the fencers you're going to be fencing are closer and closer matched to your skill level. Now, some of the later fights, right? If you've not been doing very well, there's no chance for you to then suddenly become the winner of the tournament in the later fights. But you're still fencing, and you're fencing someone who's kind of close in skill level, and it's still judged, and you know, it still affects your ranking in the overall tournament. So you know, there are some things to it, but yeah, fundamentally, in none of the formats I've run can you like lose your first 3 fights and then come around and go to win. The beginners at Wessex uses 2 rounds of pools in a final, so you have two rounds of pools of 3. Because we can't seed it at the beginners because it's a beginners tournament, we have a random seeded round of pool of 3. On the back of that, you then have a seeded pool of 3. So the winners, so each pool in the second round is made up of a winner, a middle ranked and a bottom ranked person from one of the first rounds of pools, and then your final round, everybody gets 1 fight. If it's an odd number, the people at the bottom get 2 fights because they'll be in the pool of 3. And that 1 fight you get is against the person who is most closely matched to you so far across the tournament. So people who've kind of similarly done it. So the people who perform the best are fencing for gold and silver. The people who perform the worst are fencing for last and second last place, right? But you get 1 last fight against somebody who is closely matched in skill level to you, which I like. I like this ending on something where you feel like you could win, right? And I'll come back to that in a second. The format for Summer Sword Shenanigans is kind of similar. We have a pool round that determines which quartile of the tournament you're in, and then each quartile of the tournament has a Swiss round. And to win your group, your bracket in that, you have to win all of your matches. So it is essentially like an elimination tree, except for kind of dynamic matchups. Because if you lose, you can't win the tournament, but you're still fencing. You still get to fence some other people, and you're still fencing for 4th or 5th or 3rd or 4th or whatever it happens to be. And that one again ends in a final, right? It's against someone who's kind of closely matched to you. It's not exactly Swiss because of the way I did the matchups to it is a bit different, but it's close. And the last thing I want to say about this, yes, the kind of getting a bunch of fights for everybody is an important part of running no knockout formats. But the other thing I really like about it is that you end your tournament. Most people end their tournament on a high rather than a low, right? Because one of the big problems with getting knocked out of a tournament, especially if it happens early, is that you're done, right? And let's face it, particularly if that last fight had judging issues that you don't agree with, whether they're true or not, things that you didn't agree with, that's what's going to stick in your mind about the judging for the whole tournament, because that is the one that caused you to end the thing. So judging in the bad judging in the pool with a couple of bad calls, especially if they don't determine the results of a fight, not gonna really affect you too much. You'll probably come and say, that was some bad calls, it's fine. But especially if you've been knocked out of a tournament on the back of them, that's what leads to people being quite bitter about judges in particular. But even if it's not a judging issue, that kind of knockout, you've got this massive adrenaline rush from being in a tournament and you're being in an elimination stage, and you've been knocked out of the tournament, and you get a massive dump, right? And that's invariably going to lead to kind of bad moods and this kind of stuff. Whereas no knockout, you're in it to the end, and with what I've always liked to do, having this final match, right? Everybody gets a final against somebody that they think they can win against, right? Or they probably can't win against. And most of those final matches end up being very close because even if one person's better than the other, right? They are closely matched in skills most of the time, and most of those finals end up being a few points in it, and people think, I could have won even if I didn't, right? Whereas again, lots of pooled eliminations formats, there's at least people who kind of scrape through. If you've used a power of 2, which I don't necessarily think is the best idea, like 16, 32 or whatever for your elimination brackets, then the people who just kind of scrape through to the eliminations are invariably going to be fencing the people who cleaned up in the pools. So a lot of the time their last match is not something which is close. Their last match is something that they're going into sometimes with dread, honestly, right? Or sometimes just thinking, oh well, I'm just gonna have fun, this person's really good and it'll be interesting. Kind of how your attitude to that depends on you. But nonetheless, they're not going into their last match thinking they're going to win it. They go to the last match thinking, well, this is my last match, and what that means to them, is up to them. So I would encourage people to try no knockout formats. Right, Swiss standard. There's lots of stuff out about how to run a Swiss tournament. That's something easy to do. Consecutive rounds of pools. I like rounds of pools where you're split into your bracket. So your performance means that you're now in the top half. Top half can still win, bottom half can't win, but you've still fencing for position. You're still able to fence. And I really like having this last final for everybody, so everybody knows that that's what's determining their thing, and it gets people a nice fun way to end the day. Thanks for watching, and please go run no knockout formats, and if you want advice on them, feel free to drop a message in the comments and I'll try.